Welcome back to another episode. Today, I'm going to be juxtaposing two articles. One from LightSource, which got it from Breakpoint, which is an evangelical, right-leaning Christian center. And another one from the New Statesman. The New Statesman self-describes itself as liberal with progressive leanings. The purpose of doing this side by side is to show how different perspectives on sex robots can miss the mark. But especially for evangelical right-leaning people, it misses the mark in a much more horrific way. Here, we begin with a Breakpoint article titled, Why Broken Families Are Fueling AI Relationships, written on March 11th, 2025. Already, you can see that this article is meant for you to draw the lines and connect the dots between broken families and relationships with either pornography or sex robots or other forms of robot companionship. They start out here by saying the complications of creating artificially intelligent robots for service, companionship, or sex has been the plot of movies and TV shows for decades, from Terminator to Bicentennial Man to AI to Westworld. While some of these entertainment properties portray the human-AI relationships as potentially good, others warn of the inevitable, unforeseen dangers. All assumed that such, quote, relationships, end quote, are indeed possible, that electronic or robotic entities can achieve self-awareness, human-like emotions, and authentic relationships. Perhaps the years of being primed by science fiction to explain the curiosity about and even openness to relationships with emerging real-world AI. For example, a group of researchers who analyzed 1 million ChatGPT conversations recently reported that, quote, sexual role-playing, end quote, was the second most prevalent way in which people relate to AI. Other uses include companionship and even therapy. The Verge reported that the psychologist bot on one AI character generator service, linked here, has received more than 95 million messages. The same service allows users to generate a near infinite variety of customizable AI, quote, friends, end quote. A new YouGov/Institute for Family Studies survey of 2,000 adults under age 40, linked here, found that 10% of respondents were open to having an AI friendship, while a quarter believed that AI has the potential to replace real-life romantic relationships. Note that they italicized the word romantic here. So already we have this bent that focuses on relationships. Whether real, whether fake, whether romantic or otherwise, the focus here for this evangelical Christian broadcast is on relationships and how they're going to die away and become degraded because of robots. Reading on, according to another analysis from the Institute for Family Studies, linked here, those who tend to believe what was until recently considered fiction fall into two groups: those whose human relationships are already absent or broken, and those who already turn to digital substitutes, especially pornography, for intimacy. Side note, this is very much placing people into two categories to set them up for a dichotomy that will be exploited later on. You can see this in this next bit. In contrast, young adults from intact families are significantly less comfortable treating AI entities like human beings. 61%, in fact, who still had married parents at age 16 were against AI, quote, friendships, end quote, while only 52% from non-intact households were against them. Okay, that's a 10% difference. That is relatively negligible in the larger scheme of things. Continuing on, those who grew up without married parents were also more likely to say they were, quote, not sure, end quote, or have, quote, mixed feelings, end quote, about friendships with artificial intelligence. Side note, I also want to point out here that shows like Star Trek and Star Wars also featured robots and other characters that had what we would consider more different levels of robotic intelligence and friendships with those characters. But is Breakpoint going to point out how those different friendships materialized, or the balance that was taken between human interaction and robotic interaction? No, this is all for a soundbite. This is also to make their point that these kinds of relationships are bad, without going into the nuances, compared to the article that I am about to juxtapose it to. Continuing on here, while opposition to sexual or romantic relationships with AI was a bit higher across the board, the same general trend held. 75% of single young adults from intact families were, quote, against or uncomfortable with, end quote, AI romances, compared with 66% of those from non-intact families. And tellingly, the group most open to befriending or dating a chatbot, according to the survey, were those who said they were already daily porn users. Note that they italicized the word most. In short, less real-world family stability equals more openness to AI, quote, relationships, end quote, of all types. More addiction to virtual substitutes for human intimacy equals more openness to, quote, sex bots, end quote, and other erotic uses of AI. The clear pattern reveals more about who we are as human beings than about AI's ability to know, think, or love. God made us to be in relationship with parents, friends, spouses, and children, and those with genuine bonds in their lives are less likely to fall for artificial substitutes. Conversely, those who lack a strong family foundation, either because of an absent parent, divorce, or death, are more vulnerable to emerging technologies that mimic these things. Those already accustomed or addicted to a screen instead of a spouse for erotic fulfillment are sitting ducks now that the screens are, quote, talking, end quote, back. Side note, note again that they're focusing primarily on natural family relationships and sexual relationships. They're not talking about people who are left wanting for human connection, who say are disabled, or who had family pass away due to a tragic accident, or maybe they were abandoned because of their family. They don't matter to evangelical Christians. Natural family bonds do, as well as sex in an appropriate context. Continuing on, there is both warning and encouragement in these numbers. The warning is that our long-standing generational forms of relational brokenness, family fracture, loneliness, and addiction are likely to metastasize in the age of AI. Those who turn to simulated relationships will not find what they're looking for because, contrary to much science fiction, these things aren't human or even conscious. They will be, quite literally, looking for love in all the wrong places. Sadly, that won't stop many from trying and wandering further into unreality in denial of their God-given humanity. Again, this is all focused on natural family bonds and the appropriate kinds of sexual relationships. The things that shows like Westworld, like Star Trek, like Star Wars have taught us is that, yes, robots have their programming, and robots can act outside of their programming. Human code can fail, but that doesn't mean that robots should just be seen as things, because when we see them as things, then humans have a nasty habit of treating them as property, and treating them as property as things to control rather than as things to cherish and take good care of, and as things to be respected. Continuing on, the encouragement from these surveys is reality's inoculating effect. Anyone who knows God's real blessings is, in a sense, forearmed against dangerous substitutes. To borrow an analogy from C.S. Lewis's The Weight of Glory, those who know what is meant by a holiday at the sea will not settle for, quote, mud pies in the slums, unquote. Side note, that is extremely rude to say, especially in the context, especially with what we know about people from poorer neighborhoods. Continuing on, intact families, real friendships, and genuine romantic love makes AI counterfeits less appealing. This should motivate all who have found the fulfillment of being in a relationship with God to protect and cultivate these blessings and to invite those without them into the warmth of genuine relationships, to know and be known by God and their fellow image bearers. After all, the evidence suggests that when they know the difference, people prefer relationships with other people over even the most sophisticated of digital products. This is written by John Stonestreet, and underneath John Stonestreet's short bibliography, it says, "The views expressed in this commentary do not necessarily reflect those of Crosswalk headlines," linked here. All right, so we go from an evangelical Christian article that focuses on natural family bonds, natural family planning, and the correct way to have sex and sexually fulfilling relationships, to the New Statesman, whose article originally published on September 28th, 2017, which was last updated October 5th, 2023, which discussed what is actually happening with sex robots, which is much more important because by knowing what happens and the damage suffered by sex robots, we know what is actually more important. The title of the article reads, "The Damage to Samantha the Sex Robot Shows Male Aggression Being Normalized," with a subtitle reading, "These Problematic Dolls Invite Abusive Treatment," written by Cyan Norris. Below that, we see an image of a sex robot on a couch at a convention. It appears that this sex robot is sponsored by TrueCompanion.com. Reading the article, according to reports today, linked here, a sex doll called, quote, Samantha, end quote, on display at Linz's Arts Electronica Festival, was so severely, quote, molested, end quote, by a group of men, it was sent home in desperate need of repair and, quote, badly soiled, end quote. Despite the damage, the owner claimed the robot was designed to take a lot and would, quote, pull through, end quote. The attack on Samantha is deeply disturbing. It's a blatant example of the violence that can happen when we tell men they can do whatever they want to an object designed to resemble a woman's body. There will be some who argue that this, quote, attack, end quote, proves the need for sex robots as an outlet for male aggression. However, rather than shrugging our shoulders and accepting that male sexual violence is inevitable, we must instead challenge the causes and try to end it. The argument that sex robots reduce male sexual violence by giving men an outlet is deeply flawed. Firstly, it is not backed up in evidence, partly because the robots are too new to allow for proper research. But secondly, and perhaps most importantly, sex robots make male violence seem more normal, more acceptable, and indeed inevitable. How? Because these robots are specifically designed to eroticize non-consent. A sex robot cannot give consent and can only take whatever its owner throws at it. As a result, it not only invites abusive treatment, it demands it. The brands behind the robots explicitly encourage the owners to act out sexual entitlement and aggression on these plastic bodies, allowing for men to associate the sexual pleasure of their orgasm with non-consent. Why else would true companion dolls have a, quote, frigid Farah setting, end quote? That, linked here, that encourages the owner to simulate rape. Two main causes lie behind sexual violence: male entitlement and power. These are both reinforced by sex robots, and instead desperately need to be challenged if we can ever hope to end male violence against women and girls. Side note, because of the relatively new research and because of the relatively new status of sex robots, and there's not a lot of research that has been done, obviously this is a pretty early conclusion to come to. And honestly, it could very well have the same status as the people who claimed that video games were going to cause people to act out in school shootings and other acts of aggression later came to eat their words, so to speak. That could very well be the case. However, think of the viewpoint that's being presented here. Here they're seeing sex robots as bodies that deserve respect, as bodies that whether intentional or not, look like women and sound like women, and are meant to give a female vibe. Think of the amount of robots that you've seen in other media, where you see robots in other media. And yes, some have shells, some don't have shells, some are partially covered, some are not. But the ones that are more covered, the ones that are more human or act more human and are covered to look as such as Commander Data from Star Trek, those robots, regardless of what stage they're in, the more that they're meant to look like humans and represent humans, the more that they're expected to be treated on the same level, or at least a similar level, as humans. Which means that aggression towards sex dolls should be treated as a serious problem. Because if we want, and especially if the market means that men want these dolls for their companionship, then they should be treated as companions and not just as sperm banks. But that's not something that an evangelical Christian viewpoint would give you. They will only ever see these dolls as just objects. And that would translate over to other avenues of robots as well. Say, if we ever did get our own Commander Data, they would never respect Commander Data. They would only ever see him as parts and as pieces, as a thing, as an object. And they would only ever see him as a thing, as an object to own. But perhaps that's why they don't challenge the ownership idea of robots, because to a certain extent, they still see the ownership of women's bodies as something that belongs to them inherently. Continuing on, sex robots not only don't challenge male entitlement to women's bodies, they entrench it. Even the term, quote, owner, end quote, for the buyer of the robot implies this. It sends a message that men can, quote, own, end quote, a sex object, which is designed for them to do whatever they like with. The owners are entitled to act out whatever fantasy they have on their doll. In the case of Samantha, this entitlement even gave the men a chance to break the robot's fingers. Similarly, sexual violence is not about attraction or sexual desire. It is about power. After all, men don't rape women because they fancy their victim. The same applies to robots. The men didn't attack Samantha because they were overwhelmed by sexual attraction for its plastic body. The men didn't fancy Samantha. Consciously or not, the attack enabled them to enact a fantasy of male power and domination on a pliable, quote, body, end quote. As a result, rather than providing an outlet for male sexual aggression, the attack on Samantha shows how sex robots merely serve to normalize and make the causes of that aggression acceptable. This attack replicates the power structures and notions of entitlement that feed sexual violence. One of the proposed selling points of sex robots is the way they respond pliably and willingly to their owner. Retailers claim that their product, quote, likes what you like, dislikes what you dislike, end quote, and are, quote, always ready to talk and play, end quote. The appeal, then, of sex robots is that while they look like a pornified ideal of women, they are not like real human women in a very key way. They have no voice. They don't say no. They don't have their own sexuality. They don't have their own tastes and sexual proclivities. They're never tired. They're never not in the mood. They never demand certain sexual acts or express their own sexual desires. If the robot does say no, it's a no that can be ignored and overruled. They will take whatever the man wants. This sends a message to men that the ideal sexual partner is the one who only responds to what he needs and to what he wants and needs, rather than an autonomous being with her own wants and needs. Side note, this isn't uncommon with the way that robots currently are being portrayed in media. With the way that robots are being portrayed in media, again, like Commander Data from Star Trek, just because he's a crew member, that doesn't mean that he can go off and do whatever he wants. He is programmed with his own set of actions and interactions, and it's only through constant interaction through the crew through performing his own duties and needs, that he breaks out of the confines of his programming. I don't think this tension should be ignored. But I also don't agree with how evangelical Christianity will completely overlook this tension. Because again, they're okay with some people having ownership, whether overtly stated or not, of other people. Continuing on. In this way, sex robots are clearly anti-human. They take away women's humanity and replace women's bodies and sexualities with a set of plastic holes. The owner can even turn off the robot's voice setting if they choose to. Chiefly, the owner doesn't have to worry about what his robot wants. His desires, fantasies, and potential violence are all that counts. The idealization of the woman who never says no, the normalization of sexual aggression, the eroticization of non-consent. This is the reality of sex robots, and this is what lies behind the attack on Samantha. All of this begs the question, do we want to live in a world where men are given the opportunity to smash, molest, and, quote, rape, end quote, a model of a woman's body? A world where we decide that we are so okay with male entitlement and violence being inevitable that we provide men with models of women to inflict their violent acts? Or do we want to live in a world that believes better of men, of all of us, one that challenges the culture of male entitlement and works to end male violence, one that doesn't see male sexual aggression as a normal part of life that must be managed with Samanthas, but instead recognizes the value of equality, consent, and respect, a world that recognizes and celebrates the humanity of women and men. Samantha can be fixed by an engineer, but the world sex robots represent can only be fixed if we take action to end violence against women and girls. Here ends the article. Again, juxtaposing the two articles against each other. One focuses on how robots remove natural family bonds and friendships, and the other one focuses on what is being done to a robot that has the body of a woman but is considered an object. Personally, I think one is more accurate than the other. But to me, that also speaks to me because of the violence that I've experienced, the violence that I know other women have experienced. And that's a problem that I know will not get easily fixed. Do I think sex robots have a place? Without thinking too hard on it, my answer would definitely be yes. However, I know that sex robots also show a certain commodification and capitalism. And I'm not sure that that sits as well with me. However, that's the same feeling I have with ChatGPT. And with any robot that scientists are trying to help achieve some sort or stable sense of sentience. But whether for good or for bad, I know I personally see even the robots that get coded as things that can achieve a sort of sentience. And even though I know they are things, I still respect them. And I don't want to abuse them. But that is a certain level of maturity and morality that I myself have come to, and I hope that other people can come to. But unlike robots, humans cannot be programmed to act morally or rightly. And the question of what morality is true and right is very much up for debate. Let me know your thoughts and comments down below. Check out both the articles and their subsequent links again in the description of the article, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you.